I will pass it over to Megan Schaefer for the meeting. Thank you.
Just sorry to jump in here. Because you don't have a quorum of the policy, the meeting still goes forward. It's just that any recommendation that comes out of this morning will be a recommendation of the board members present at policy, not a policy committee recommendation. Hopefully a distinction without a difference, but just needed to say it.
I appreciate that, yeah. And we'll make sure to mention that when we're doing minutes at the meeting, or full board meeting. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be back in 2024 for policy, and I know a lot of exciting things happened in December, and a lot of changes moved forward. And so for the agenda today, we have some things that we've talked about that are moving forward, but I would say largely a number of items that are under discussion. So we always, for the benefit of everyone here and who listening at home, like to bring those potential changes to the policy committee for updates, so that if there's input or questions or concerns, that we are aware of that from a board lens, and when we continue the work, we have that in mind, so that we can either bring it back here or in other forums communicate, responses to any of those questions or concerns. But for those of you that were here in December, we addressed change to policy 007, which is now on the agenda for adoption. This is a policy that we looked at also in November and made some adjustments to things such as, just to put, I think, make it more consistent with current practice and practice moving forward. And this is, again, one of a revision like that, which is to delete reference to the Education Committee meetings, which was discussed in December, and then add a reference to the Sunshine Act. So I would say largely this has already been discussed a great deal, so there were no further changes to my knowledge since November. And that's what's being recommended, or since December, I should say, and that's what's being recommended for your, to move it forward today.
Any change? I have no changes. Any changes from the community? Or not requests? Okay, I think we're good to move to the next section.
Okay, as for first readings, and this is an item that's been under first read for a couple meetings now, and the reason is, one, we made some changes to this policy on page 10, which addresses the name, image, and likeness, and ensuring, again, just to recap a little bit about that change, due to changes in the law and PIAA bylaws. More specifically, we wanted to be sure that our approach to this issue of name, image, and likeness for student athletes was a balance of obviously complying with these new bylaws, but also not making sure that we are aware, or to the best of our ability aware. So there's like a sort of a reporting requirement under this policy, so that we can be sure that it doesn't end up in a situation wouldn't end up in penalties for either that student athlete or the team as a whole. So that is really the intent behind this, not to necessarily diminish opportunities for students, but to make sure that we're doing it in accordance with the bylaws. So that's where we started the discussion on this back in September and October. At that same time, and sort of connected to some larger scale discussions we've been having around extracurricular activities and student wellness and equity, it made sense as we looked at this policy to think about not just that policy, but our policy regarding co-curricular activities, and start to maybe reframe, not necessarily reframe, but establish a purpose statement to look at from a policy perspective. And we'll talk about that a little bit later under the discussion items, but just know that that's sort of why it was pending as a first read, so that we could catch up and try to make some some broader revisions to the policy that I think are more consistent with where we are as a district and where we're headed. So are there any questions about the status of that policy at this point?
Abby, do you have anything? No, I don't. We had quite extensive discussions before this come for the first reading.
Right.
Is there any comments from community? No. Okay. Let's moving along.
All right, moving right along to purchasing on page 12. Mr. Orlando, would you like to join us? There's some revisions to both this administrative regulation as well as Administrative Regulation 621 that are, I would say, consistent. Would you like to introduce those for us? Thank you.
Sure, under Policy 610, so annually the Commonwealth adjusts the bid thresholds and also the quote thresholds every January. So both of the bid thresholds and the quote thresholds have been adjusted. So as you can see in the policy, the quote threshold has been increased from 12,200 to 12,600, and the bid threshold is going from 22,500 to 23,200. So you can see throughout the policy, we're just making annually, we've been doing that every year when they increase the threshold. So that's basically all that we're doing, the policy. Everything on the AR, everything else is the same. So you can see every year we've been doing this, adjusting it as the Commonwealth does.
Thank you. Is there something for the community when these things say that we have to be advertised for 3 weeks? These are things that are already budgeted or are not budgeted?
They're budgeted.
Yeah.
So anytime we do a bid, you're required by law three weeks in the newspaper to advertise that, so yes.
Okay, thank you.
It also pertains to, we do like construction projects, any type.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, thanks. Abby, any questions? No. Nope. I have no questions. Questions from the community? Nope. Okay, thanks. Next.
Then AR 621, we're making a couple adjustments here. One is also the threshold for the bid, the formal bidding process, making that 23,200. We haven't adjusted in years. Of 28,600 is probably from 3-4 years ago when we put the policy together. So we're making that adjustment. And the only other adjustment is on page 20, under the small purchase procedure. Recently, we had a review by the Commonwealth on procurement, and an RFP is considered to be a formal process, and we have in this section that the small purchase is an informal process. So they wanted us to remove the one phrase saying including a request for proposal, RFP procedure, remove that from that section. Since that's a formal process, in this section, the small purchase is strictly an informal process. So that's all we're doing.
Okay. On page 20, there's 3 mentions of the number, and there's one 22,300. How is that? So the maintenance and repair is a lower number than the.
So the small purchase, the 10,000 you're seeing in the title.
No,
I think that's a typo.
it is a typo.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, thank you.
On 10,000 to 23,200 on page 10, the first
Correct.
paragraph, second. Okay.
That's what it should be. It's a typo.
Yeah. Okay. Abby, anything? No? Okay. And community, anything? Nope. Okay, thanks. And let's see.
Okay, moving right along. I don't like this. It's going to be over too soon.
We can always add things. We can add things.
Earlier, I spoke about the 151. You'll see in your packet at page 33, thank you. the proposed purpose statement. This has been in the policy packet, I think, for a couple of months. So again, this is the idea of, like, to the extent that members of the policy committee have any questions or concerns or would like to talk a little bit more about this language, that is the purpose for putting it here. But for now, this is what we're working from. And again, this is draft language. It probably will change again, but it was the idea of taking those both 151 and 124 and start to build that purpose statement together with recognizing some of the other policies that I referenced earlier, which was student wellness and equity, because it made sense to us to start to, make those connections clearer for our community and for our, obviously for our students and staff. So that's where we are, and we're continuing to build out the administrative regulations. So that would be what you should expect to see next, is how does this look in practice? And a lot of what you see currently in the policies and administrative regulations will carry over, but again, with some refreshed and updated language to ensure that we're not only making those connections, but that we're memorializing current practices, because it's been a while since we've done, an update on these particular policies. So that's where we are as far as an update with that policy. If I'll pause for any thoughts. Otherwise, we can continue to move through our discussion items.
I appreciate that we're incorporating the health policy, so it's more of the holistic type of approach to this. So that's what I appreciate for this. Right now, I don't see anything. It's really short.
Right.
So, Abby, did you have anything to add to this?
I have kind of a quick question, I guess. For number 6, non-district students, does that mean students that are like in competition with our clubs or something? What does that mean?
It actually means students that we would allow or by law need to allow to participate in our extracurricular or co-curricular activities, but are not enrolled in our public schools. So
can I have an example of like what that would be?
So a student in, I'm sorry, a student who's attending a charter school that doesn't have a team that they would be able to compete with may be eligible to participate in a team that we offer, provided that they meet all the requirements that one of our students who is enrolled in our school meets. So largely, we don't have a lot of students that fall into that category, but that's just one example of where we, by law, are required to open our doors for those experiences for children that aren't enrolled in our school, but are residents. I should make sure I'm clear on that are residents of Lower Merion School District.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Or homeschooled. Homeschooled.
Or homeschooled,
Yeah, that's another
okay.
example. That we have we can make sure the board has an updated chart of like who the non-district students may be that this type of policy would apply to.
That would be helpful just to see. Thank you.
Students not attending district schools who are district residents.
Correct. Did someone know?
Sorry, I'm so used to just having my voice project. Do we need to add that they are residents in this sentence, or just leave it at non-district for just clarity?
We can do that. That was, I think, language that we pulled from a prior version, so that might help with clarity for sure. Thank you. Okay, I think we can move on. Is that okay? What do you want to ask?
Yeah. Any community comment? Okay, thank you.
I'll make a
revisions for first reading.
Okay.
This is one that you may see as a first read next month. We typically like, when we're doing a fairly substantial revision, that you have the administrative regulation together with that. So assuming we have that ready, we would move that for a first reading, because oftentimes we find that if you don't have both, there's a lot more questions about the policy in the absence of that. So we'll work to that, ideally have that ready in February. Next on the agenda is an item that there are actually 4 policies that are grouped together, and I see that there's at least 2 steps to our reasoning for bringing this forward now. One is to, again, from a user endpoint, have a little easier time figuring out what we're trying to communicate here, and that we have curricular materials and resource materials, and there's a process for how we select and adopt those items, and to provide a little more clarity about when families might have a concern or a need to review or an objection to it, that process is connected to the selection, as opposed to sort of where it lands now, tied to a policy that we've long had called controversial and value issues. And so I think we've had a lot of internal, not a lot, I would say internal discussion about that being more of a standalone statement, as opposed to it just being seemed to be connected to a curricular decision explicitly, which is sort of part 2. And we want to talk about the content of the controversial value issue policy in a probably more so in a future meeting for the purpose of the proposed revisions that are in front of you for discussion. This isn't necessarily to move forward because we haven't done a full vetting, but I'm going to ask Ken to provide some perspective of like what they did and their recommendations as to why we should be moving in this direction regarding that process.
Thank you. First of all, it didn't seem to make sense that these were all scattered in different policies. Many of the considerations that apply to your curriculum selection, adoption, and particularly objection, they're the same. So rather than having them in just 2 different places and then trying to parse out when something's a curriculum versus resource, it just made sense to have it all consolidated. With respect to the policy 119 being consolidated into here, my firm has noticed an uptick in objections to curriculum materials and to resource materials across the country and even locally, and it just made sense to by calling a policy controversial issues, it almost puts the rabbit in the hat. What you may not see as controversial, or what, that's always going to be in the eye of the beholder. So it just made sense to, again, consolidate that process, to not sort of, like I said, put the rabbit in the hat that we consider something to be controversial just because it's teaching. Much of what gets objected to is in the curriculum or in the resource materials because it is a core value of the district in the first place. So with all of that, it seemed to make sense to put it all together, make the language less conducive to a challenge, put it that way, in the sense of not like look for a challenge, but also to make sure that the process for dealing with an objection or a challenge is something that can be managed, is something that can be managed, whether it's an isolated objection or whether somebody comes in and wants to object to 15 or 20 things in the curriculum just because of a particular ideology. I hope that made sense.
It did. I appreciate this being, because sometimes it is difficult to find when you have to jump around, and this is consolidating, I think, is the way that you're doing is the way to go. Are we talking about both the administrative policy the policy and the administrative regulation at once, or are we just looking at the policy currently?
In terms of your feedback,
Yes, yeah.
I think we typically defer to how the committee would like to move forward, but I think it's helpful to start with policy, because typically the administrative regulation should be following the language of the policy as opposed to they are following, like leading the policy. So I would ask us to focus on the policy questions and concerns first.
I guess it could go under selection of resource materials. I'm just wondering, when we're choosing books, I've heard it mentioned, and I'm blanking on it, that our librarian follows a certain guidelines of, is it a certain national library, is it, or something that for selection of books? And I wondered if that's something we should have mentioned in the policy. Yeah.
So I probably should have prefaced to say that this hasn't been fully vetted with everyone, and I think my read of this, and Ken, you can say if that's not the case, but it looks like they largely lifted existing language and moved it as opposed to reframing language. So the feedback you give today is certainly something as a team we can take back and say maybe that's what if we're not prepared to answer every question you have, I think these, as I said earlier, like your feedback in a discussion item is really helpful for us so we can figure out, how and if we can incorporate that in policy or that belongs in an administrative regulation. So what I heard you say is if we have guidance, like more specifically around selection of books, like maybe citing that or referencing that in the policy, the AR might be helpful. So, I don't, Dr. McGloin, did you?
Yeah, and I think there's some, and we need to go through and vet this. To be 100% honest, we'll go back and look at this. But there is some in the, if you look at the AR on page 41, there is a listing of criteria for selecting library resources, library media. And so it's in the AR versus it being in the policy. Right, because we would use multiple criteria to select resources. Again, we'll want to go back and vet this just to be certain that it's all 100% accurate.
Well, do you have any comments on that?
No, I think this is.
One of the things, if I can just make a comment related to this, one of the things that we have to recognize that when we look at commercial materials, largely textbooks, Texas and California are the two largest customers of textbook companies. So typically what happens, unless you have a textbook that is written for your state, they're written for California customers or Texas customers. And without trying to make a political statement, sometimes the politics in both of those states are different. So great care is taken when we examine commercial resources to identify if there is bias and how to overcome that bias in text. Social studies, commercial materials in particular, have been a concern, I know of mine and of the district, for several years. And so what I think we're seeing is a switch to more primary and secondary sources and the lived experiences of people, because that naturally helps us get at what actually occurred in history without it going through a number of biased lenses.
Thanks. I really don't have it because it feels like this is almost like how we've been operating. So it's really not. And I find to bring this to further discussion I'll ask, any community comment? Yeah.
While the community's coming to them.
Yeah, our community.
I just wanted to add that, again, back to sort of how we've processed these types of changes, and consolidating and upgrading is the next step. So we'll have further discussion internally, but it sounds like we're okay to advance this from a structure standpoint. And then if there's additional changes that we're proposing as it relates to content, we'll certainly, give you advance notice. But this was the start of the conversation.
Hi, Alice Lou Brown, Penn Valley. I have a question, and I don't know if I'm missing it because I'm trying to scan it quickly. Is there a place where it talks about how parents can see if they want to view the curriculum? And I'm thinking more on the fact that I'm trying to get a group of parent volunteers to start a group that may think about bringing assemblies back to the schools. And one of the things we want to make sure is the assemblies kind of go with some of the curriculum stuff. So I don't know where to start to look for something like that so that we make sure the assembly or the authors that we bring in kind of goes along with what's happening. I know in the other districts, they know the curriculum really well, so they're like, okay, we always make sure that since second grade does Japan, they get this person every year. So I like to do the same thing, but I just don't know where to start, and I don't know if it's supposed to go in something like this, or is just something in the AR, or, yes.
I can answer from a policy lens, but I think it sounds like there's also just a connection and understanding lens. So there's policy 105 and 105.1 is where there's like an actual procedure for review of curriculum materials. But what I hear you say may be just more of a connection to, having a conversation on behalf of ISC or HSAs. So I don't know, Dr. McGloin, did you want to?
Sure.
Jump in.
We don't post the actual written curriculum on the website. When we have parent requests to go through curriculum, I typically, or somebody within the department meets with them, and we'll go over the whole curriculum document with them, but it is not shared from a public perspective. That said, on the website, there's some overviews, and we're working on a revision of the overviews. But getting into details, we probably should talk about, like, helping you look through the documents and what you're looking for.
Okay.
Yep.
And is there a reason why it's not put on the website for public viewing?
Because it's our work and our materials, and so we don't share them from a public-facing perspective. Plus, they do change, so curriculum is an ongoing process, and the documents do change over time as well. Yeah.
I do think, though, as we think about putting the overview documents on the website, to have the topics listed and explained, like especially around science and social studies, like I'm thinking at the elementary level from an assembly, experience. Like if you know that, we study heroes and heroines, right? Having something like that, just that language is not enough, but what is actually done in those units, like a little blurb about each of the units, I think is incredibly helpful in helping parents and community members understand what's in that unit, right?
Right. And I just I'm thinking more on like if there was, I'm always thinking about parents as resources and coming in to like speak about different things, that kind of thing. Not just to look at the curriculum and to pick at it and say, why are we doing this, why are we doing that, but more as an angle where the parents can share things and, like I said, assemblies and stuff, but that would be more overall. But, also from a parent just wanting to know, well, what's in this year's curriculum, what are we studying this year, that kind of thing. Would have been really helpful just to, talk, just to know what's coming up.
I really think, and as we finish out, as we work through this spring and get things ready for next year, I think having an overview of each grade level. So second grade, here are the literacy skills, here are the math skills, here's what we're learning in science and social studies, here are some, connections to the real world that we're making. And I think that goes a long way, because I think, to your point, there's a lot of expertise in our community. And, having, we're talking about assemblies, but there's also many opportunities, for guest speakers and, and collaboration.
Especially at the older level, because they're not really doing assemblies, but there are a lot of, I don't know, just people parents that could help with certain subjects if they have some topic. And it would just kind of break up kind of the daily of just one teacher teaching it all the time. Because when you have something like somebody that comes in, especially from the community, to share, it makes it really enriching.
I'm also thinking, since my arrival here, I've talked to some businesses in the township that are interested in having kids come to work for them as interns and whatnot. And so I can share a template for some grade level overviews. I think that'd be a great step forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Just to be clear, so I think I'm perhaps hearing that you'd be receptive if we also included the curriculum reviews in 105.1, if we incorporated that into this policy. So that's one more policy we can incorporate into this, so that it would be selection, adoption, review, and objections.
And that's separate from this general review section, as opposed to the policy 119, which is following in this, is for controversial values, objections.
Correct.
Okay.
That's 105.1 is review, 119 is objections. Again,
Right.
why are they in two different places?
Yeah, because
They should all
reviews
be-
are not always objections, so
Right.
yeah, that would be reasonable to move, to me, to be, Abby, would you be in agreement? Yeah.
Consolidation, so.
Yeah.
I'll just say too, when we consolidate policies, I think it's incredibly helpful because it provides comprehensive understanding. And when there is an issue that needs to be addressed, the likelihood of missing something when you're looking in multiple policies is really, far greater. So I appreciate the efforts to merge where it makes sense to merge.
Also, can I just say that sometimes when you realize what you've already written, sometimes you see that you're contradicting yourself. So it's helpful to see what your goals are.
Yeah, and you find that you use not as many words to explain the same thing, which leads to confusion. So I'm all for that move. So we'll work on that between now and the next meeting. And if internally we feel good about where it is, again, we've done this in two parts before. Sometimes we just put it all together and then move that forward. So we've got a new look, and then we take a little more time to just say, is all the language like where it needs to be for the future, and then we bring it back and say, that was the second round is looking a little like more fine tuning this, but more to come. It's exciting. Always like to have policy work to do. Next is on the agenda is another just update in terms of a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes related to the policies identified there, 212, 213, and 217 to some degree, which is about reporting of student progress, grading of student progress, and high school graduation requirements. These have long sort of been in a holding pattern on our agenda. I mean, I can talk about the COVID break and all of the other things that have been happening that we prioritized, but this is certainly work that has been ongoing, and Dr. McGloin has been leading this work through committee, and I believe, are you able to give us a brief update on where we are with that work? Or it may be highlighted more so next.
I'm sorry. I was half with you and half not with you.
No, I
I'll be honest.
apologize first.
Can I quickly
I
interrupt?
was actually writing an email on the curriculum page to my team as you said that, so I apologize for that.
Can I quickly interrupt? It's not in the packet.
Correct,
Okay.
because this is sort of like where we are with the work
Got
that's
it.
going to lead to revisions, and this is just intended to be a brief update on that committee work
Yep,
today,
okay.
and nothing that's specifically been revised yet on the
Okay,
policy.
thank you.
Kind of
Right,
like the
212.
background work.
Yeah, 212, 213, and 217, correct? Okay. So at our meeting on Tuesday night, Curriculum Committee of the Board meeting, Tuesday night, we are presenting proposed changes to the way that we do our GPA, calculate GPA, and also what counts towards graduation requirements and our credit count for graduation requirements. All of those things will have an impact on the policies that are up here. And so the Curriculum Committee of the Board will review and hopefully give us a green light to move forward. We're making some recommendations to change the weighting scale. Right now, we have a weighting scale that has a 1-point differential, so it gives an additional point to students for honors, AP, and dual enrollment, and IB. So those 4 things give you an additional point value. And so we're recommending actually reducing that. We're the largest differential that we've found in like districts and surrounding districts. So we're making a recommendation to have 2 actually tiers, one for honors, which I believe is 0.15. This is off the top of my head, so I want to make sure I'm right. And then AP, IB, and dual enrollment all would be a 0.25. So it's not as substantial as it was before. We've surveyed students and teachers and asked for feedback, and we believe that that'll allow more students to take different courses. It looks like they will choose other courses that they may not have chosen before, might be an elective, but we only offer it at the CP level. In addition to that, we're going to be recommending that all of our courses count towards the GPA. They currently do not, and we would like to see that happen so that students will take additional courses. And we've been looking at it through an equity lens as well. Truly, it's an equity issue for us, we believe, and so we're hoping that these changes will help with that as well. Will help students to take classes that may not traditionally have taken them before, or balance out classes as well.
Can I just interject
Yep.
there for a second? So, I think the pandemic put a big bright light on a lot of things, and one of the things that it put a big bright light on was students' high school experiences. And when you talk with kids, and in my superintendent advisory teams, one of the things that I've heard a lot so far this year is that kids sometimes do not take certain courses because they feel that other courses look better on a transcript. So kid has a real passion for art, but doesn't take the art class because, it's not counted in the GPA, or it's going to look better if, they take what is perceived to be a more rigorous class. But what more and more colleges and universities, including top-tier colleges and universities, are looking for is not just the transcript that has all of the AP courses and IB courses. They're really looking for well-rounded experiences. So the work that Dr. McGloin and the curriculum folks have been talking about and doing with our principals and our teachers, I think is going to create a better structure for kids, because I think it's going to allow them to continue to pursue passions in high school that they might not otherwise have taken.
And then one additional thing that will be a recommendation, which is just more aligning with our state law. 21 credits are required for the state law. We have a graduation requirement that is the project requirement for us, which is great. All of our seniors leave a little bit early, do internships, do apprenticeships, come back and do presentations. I love that piece of what we do in Lower Merion. That's 0.5 credit, and it is a mandatory credit. We count that towards the 21 credits. We need to up our credit count to 21.5. So we're aligning with requirements from the state and what we require as a district. So that's just something to just come in line, nothing more than that, to make sure that we meet state requirements from a graduation perspective, and then also add the additional 0.5 that we feel is really important for every student in this district. So that's an adjustment more than anything.
I just have a question. Why would a course not have credits attached? Like what you were saying, that not all the courses we have credits attached or have graduation requirements attached. Why not?
They have credits attached to them.
Okay.
But they don't necessarily count for the GPA. So they're 2 different things. You have a credit count, no matter what class you take, there's a credit value associated with it. That gets you to that 21.5 credits or right, that the district requires for graduation. Not every class, though, counts towards a student's GPA. So art is a wonderful example. We don't count art towards the GPA currently within our system and our structure. So students sometimes will not take those courses because they want their GPA to be higher when they're going to college. But they may have a passion for art, be amazing at art, and not take an AP art class, an honors art class, or even a CP art class.
But why haven't we added, I'm just curious, because there are AP art classes.
Yeah, so this has been a discussion well before my time in the district. It was discussed many, many years. I think it's 2016 maybe was when it started, this whole discussion happened. Pandemic happened, they kind of, I think, went sideways. When I arrived, we had some discussions about it and really spent time with staff and with students and with our department chairs and our principals to make sure we felt confident in the recommendations we were making, which is that every class counts towards the GPA. But there was a lot of discussion on this with previous boards in the past already.
And this is not a Lower Merion unique thing. So I've been superintendent, this is my third superintendency. This has been a change that we've made in each of those districts. And even as a principal and a director of curriculum in 2 other districts, it's typically major courses get counted towards the GPA, but the movement really across the state is really to now bring all of those courses in. And I'm going to put my plug in for it. By not putting it in a GPA, I think it diminishes the value of that course. I think it diminishes the work that the kids do for that course, and it diminishes the work and professionalism of our teachers. So if we feel that a course is worthy of running, and for kids to take it, I really feel like it should count as in part of their overall high school experience. I feel really strongly about that.
I agree wholeheartedly.
I also feel really strongly about having more than 21 or 21 and a half credits, but I'll put the period there and just leave that as a teaser for the future.
That's a work in progress for us, as Dr. Yanni knows, but we're ready for 2 pieces of where we'd like to move forward. So CCOB meeting coming up, and then after that meeting, once we get feedback from our curriculum committee, we'll come to policy with adjustments to policy based on that discussion. Okay.
So, yeah, our timeline is this spring to move forward with both of these. More to come. The other thing I would just add to the discussion about a why and making these revisions, I think not only is it connected to the equity work, but I think it's very much tied to student wellness too, when you think about like students being able to pursue passions and not have the constraint of it being a, an obligation or to get to the next level. So I think that it really ties to that objective as well.
Well, I appreciate that. I think from a mental health perspective that we need to change the culture that every class has to be an AP or an honors class. So I think this is the right direction in that.
It also is a part of our strategic plan too. It is part of our pathways for the strategic plan. And so, we're doing work at the high school level around this. We're working on report cards in the middle school and looking at what that looks like for parents and students. And so that is all part of our strategic plan pathways as well, and moving those forward. So it really has many layers to it. Yeah. Just one more. So the 9th grade coming in would be the first class that we would recommend, and then we'll roll it in. That's our recommendation at this point. Yeah.
Thanks. All
right.
Are we on to D now?
On to D.
Okay.
And really our last substantive topic of today, that's on the,
Is there any comment from the community on, okay.
And again, this is more or less a teaser for future conversation. And when we developed the equity policy, one of the things that we knew about this that makes it unique to some degree than other policies, just from a sort of technical standpoint, is that it wasn't going to be a policy that sits on the shelf. We were going to have to continue to look at it and update it and revise it, because I think we led the way in some respects in terms of what this looks like and how it's framed and how we developed it. So I think we always reflect on, like, is it meeting the needs of our community? Is it addressing the right things? And one of the things that we were very intentional about when we developed it initially was the glossary and identifying some terms, because as we said, for a lot of things, and even, you know, implicit in a lot of our discussions today, is like having common language and understanding of that language is really important. From, you know, a community buy-in perspective, from an understanding perspective. And we recognize in this moment there might be an opportunity for us to go back and say, you know, especially as it relates to some of the defined terms, what is there, what isn't there? Is there an opportunity here to go back and revisit some of those terms, and are there some that we need to add? So this is just to open the conversation. I know Dr. Yanni wants to also add to this, his perspective of where we're headed. So I'll defer.
Thank you. So there's a line here that I understand what we mean by it, but I think it might be viewed not necessarily how we mean it. So when we talk about, in the second paragraph, we say educational equity is a shared commitment to ensure that every student get what they need to be successful. I think that is really at the heart of what our equity work is. If you look at the fourth paragraph, it says, the last sentence says, in light of the social and historical context, this policy provides explicit permission to treat people differently when circumstances necessitate that something different needs to be done. I think that sentence is problematic. I think we know that different groups of kids might need something different instructionally, but I think when we say that there's explicit permission to treat people differently, I think that sentence, although as educators we know what that means, I just want, because this is a public-facing document, I don't want people to misunderstand or misconstrue what we're actually talking about. Does that make sense?
Only question, what exactly does explicit permission mean?
So, again, back to policy development and the lens of what that meant at that time was sort of addressing the disparate impact type of situation where you don't have explicit bias or discrimination or racism. So for example, a practice that said no students who are African American can be in this class. Like, we don't have that as a rule. But sometimes you have situations or historical constructs that are resulting in what's termed in law as disparate impact. So you might see proportion of students identified, or who identifies African American in a class that is disproportionate to their enrollment in the entire population. So what this was, I think, attempting to get to is the board acknowledging, because it's nowhere else in policy, that sometimes the district administration, the district needs to move to address those things that are not explicit rules or constructs that prevent access, but in practice, there is we're seeing access denied. So to put it simply, it was an attempt to make sure that the board was authorizing the district's ability to address areas where we saw disparate impact.
If I can, I'm so sorry. I think the language that's here is really troubling. And it seems to fly in the face of the 14th Amendment and Title VI. It seems to be very, I think it doesn't achieve the goal. So if we want to say something to the effect of, we want to ensure that the entire community and the entire student community benefits and gets what they need, which is like the first sentence of the paragraph right after. I think that's about as specific as we should get, because this seems to open us up in a way that's really concerning. We specify all these different sort of characteristics and identities, and then say that we can treat people differently, which is very discriminatory language. And I think it doesn't jive. It seems really concerning. And when we think about implementation and how that can I think we should really strike that language.
Because I agree with you on that, because I'm thinking about when we're saying what every student needs to get what they need to succeed, that means we're not necessarily going to treat them the same way. We're going to treat them the way that'll help them to get what they need to succeed. But from Gwen, what you were talking about, are you talking more about there's like a structure bias that we need to be concerned about, that it's kind of an implied bias, but it happens and it's noticed, and we just need to be always aware of watching for that and ensure that these structures are changed.
Yeah, I think that's the theory, like behind the legal theory of disparate impact, is that there's inherent bias that may not be because of an explicit rule or policy, but the impact of what those policies, the impact of what look like neutral policies on certain groups of students.
So in a broader sense, wouldn't it be better to just say something like that we constantly will be reviewing and ensuring that there's no implicit bias in the structures or the policies and procedures?
Yeah, you're just trying to not give people a chance to just say, reflexively fall back on, well, I can't do this for them because I don't do that for everybody else. You don't want that.
But I think
this can be said better. You're completely
yeah,
right.
and I think the way that it's said, I mean, this is like public. This is on the internet right now. I think the way that it's said is saying that exact thing,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So, yeah, I think this is something that we should probably.
We all agree, I think.
And I think, to Ms. Schaefer's point, this policy wasn't meant to be written and put on a shelf, but to be reviewed periodically, because when I think back a couple years ago when districts started writing their equity policies, like the first iteration of equity policies look very, very different from what I would call our modern policy. So I think that's why it's so healthy and important to have this type of review, because context change, times change, world events change, and I think we have to keep looking at this policy because if equity, in the sense that we want to make sure that all kids have what they need to succeed, and we're talking about belonging, that kids not only feel that they belong here, but that they matter, that they truly matter here, then that has to be the backbone of everything we do. And so that's why I appreciate the ongoing review, of this policy, because I think it's warranted. But even beyond that, I think it's just good practice to review it.
So I think we'll make some adjustments in the interim based on feedback we've heard today, and whether it will move to a first read or be another discussion item, which it may be in February, we'll just kind of play it by ear. But I appreciate the feedback, and if there's any feedback in the interim, certainly reach out.
Can I make one more quick comment? On the last paragraph, sort of in the 1, 2, 3, 4, in the 5th paragraph. There's also language about dismantling structural barriers, and I think we need. I think there's an opportunity to kind of revise how that's written so that it's a little bit less aggressive, because while we want to be clear that it is our responsibility and it's our privilege to be educating kids to the best of their abilities, this language is. I think it sort of creates an atmosphere that isn't necessary, that doesn't really achieve the goal of what we're talking about. In my personal read on this, I think we need to be considerate of keeping things focused on what we're trying to do, which is educate, and not sort of create some mental gymnastics.
And just again, for some context in the development of this, because this, and I led with, we're here to talk about context matters, timing matters, like where we are is perhaps different than where we are. This particular part, the part that's highlighted, and it's highlighted for a reason, is that this language was presented in multiple forums throughout the development process. So I don't say that to say we shouldn't change it. I just know that there was a lot of investment in the language at the time that it was, again, particularly the shaded paragraph. So I think that might be worth, or may need some, additional vetting as we move forward, which is why maybe it lands back in a discussion session, and I think the moment matters. So again, I just wanted to provide that context for what the development process looked like.
Well, I think also that when I'm reading this too, sometimes I'm thinking about what Curry made the comment of last December's, I believe, board meeting about, one point about negative bias when we're reviewing certain things and mentioning things. So I think sometimes we need to look at this from that perspective and ensure we're doing it in a more positive, motivational, belonging slant rather than the dismantling.
And I think that's helpful in framing, like, our why for making the revisions, not that the spirit of it is that we're changing the spirit of it, but maybe the language in which we're framing the issue is what seems to be not resonating right at the moment. So I don't do, yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that, to Melly's point, we do have to recognize that there have been barriers in place for some of our families and students who reside in the district. So changing it, but also honoring the fact that there have been some institutional barriers. But again, negativity bias is my word as well. How do we frame it to be more along the lines of our belonging work and making sure that all students matter and that they do belong here? But we can't say that did not exist. And that's our work. And that's why we are in this work as well.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say one quick thing. I think both of you are saying this very well and much better than I was able to get out. I think this is a matter of being invitational as opposed to confrontational. So recognizing what really is and also how we want to move forward as opposed to sort of just continue to call it out, which doesn't really, it's not productive at a certain point.
I'm reminded of some language changes. This is somewhat related, but there used to be a magazine called Teaching Tolerance, and they changed their name and they rebranded from Teaching Tolerance to Learning for Justice, because Teaching for Tolerance sort of had maybe a negative tone, like, well, we have to be tolerant of other people. And I'm not trying to conflate that. But I'm just thinking about how like, when we're talking about equity here, we're actually talking about student empowerment, right? And so I think if we look through, how are we empowering every student to be successful? Like, how are we helping them gain the tools that they need to be successful, not just when they're with us, right? Not just when they're with us K-12, but when they're not with us, right? So I think if we look through that lens and then look at how language has morphed over time, I think, I like that. What did you say? Invitational, not confrontational?
Not
confrontational. I like that, yeah.
Sounds like we've got a little bit of work.
I'm going to add that to my next, my next presentation.
I like that.
Invitational, not confrontation.
The one that came from, it's not mine.
Again, that's the whole purpose of us bringing this back for discussion, so that we can revisit things like that we may just be operating in a way that, with the same intent. I think we're all on the same page in terms of intent. It's just how we're using language, and language is really important, which is why we have this fun committee. And that's really the end of the formal agenda that we have prepared for you today.
Yeah. Any community comment for this? I believe we've come to an end. Is this a record?
Clearly, I need to make a longer agenda.
This is your favorite day of the month, I have to say.
Is there anything else you want to talk about? Okay, well, thank you for coming here today. And our next policy meeting will be on February 2nd in the same boardroom. Thank you.
Thank you.